Welcome to With You Podcast,
where we explore relationships and life transitions.
I'm David.
And I'm Tara.
And today we're going to do our movie review for the summer.
Yeah, it's the first time we've been to the movie theater in a long time.
Yeah, and it felt like we were fancy people. We had the whole theater to ourselves.
Yeah, might have been the fact that it was a Monday.
Well, that's true. And but it was great. And we went and saw Inside Out 2.
Yeah, so everybody seems to be talking about this movie. I think we saw the first one when it first came out.
Yeah,
and
I don't remember how long ago that was. But
I know. I'm sure it was a while ago. But yeah, the idea of talking about feelings was exciting, especially for you.
Yeah.
So we went and saw Inside Out 2. Just the two of us.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed it because it kind of leaned into my favorite time of development.
I know, you got so excited about puberty all over again.
I know. I know the movie was really about feelings, but puberty is such a fun time, and they had a puberty button.
Button, yes. Yes, the alarm went off when puberty happened in this character, and everything changed. But we are getting ahead of ourselves.
As always. That's my job of like, hey, let's start in the middle and work our way back.
Yeah, so tell us about can you give a movie summary or?
Well, I'll give a shot. And
okay.
So Riley Anderson is this now turning 13-year-old girl, but when we knew her in Inside Out 1, I guess it was, she was a young child, and it was about the emerging personality that's connected to emotions. Mm-hmm. And so this was at the end of Inside Out 1, they had this end of credit clip where the alarm went off and it was, oh no, what's going on? And it was puberty. And
I forgot about that.
Yeah. So that was the nexus. And then we show up and we're inside. Well, the first clip is her birthday party, and she's turning 13, and she's moving from middle school to high school and trying out for the hockey team. And so that's where most of the tension is around sports and around peers and around emotions and kind of changes.
School and big changes in her life.
Yes.
And the new emotions that emerge as she's growing up.
And she has all this thing going on in her head, and it's personification of emotions. There's the old faithful people, and then there's new ones that come out of puberty. And my favorite clip was where the construction crew shows up and they're revamping the control center and just thinking all sorts of developmental things.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of makes sense developmentally. Like things are getting restructured.
Yeah.
Like literally things are changing.
The brain is
physically
changing.
In the brain.
Yeah. And so they do this with a construction crew where they destroy the control center. And it's kind of what's happening in adolescence of their brain. They're thinking differently. They don't have good judgment. They have great logic, but not a lot of good judgment. The council in this thing was more sensitive. So like existing feelings would touch the council. And
the console, the control panel.
Yeah, the control panel.
Yeah.
And people would experience the Riley as yelling or dramatic type of things. So we go through this and she's having changes, and then she's trying out for the high school team and coach, and finds out her best friends from elementary school are going to a different high school. And that's the tension of how do you have loyalty to old friends, shifting the schools you go to, making new friends, and the hilarity ensues.
Right. So I think it's relatable for most people, just that tension of, like you said, what had been working for her before with her feelings and the way she controlled them is now just obsolete.
Yeah.
It's not working the same way.
No.
And things are more sensitive, and it's a lot to figure out. So let's maybe introduce to the original characters. So the way the movie goes, all these characters are these, as you said, these personified emotions in her brain. So we're inside her brain and seeing kind of the stream of consciousness and where like the back of the files, where the old memories go.
You put in deep storage things that you don't want to think about.
Yeah, but her dominant emotions, there's 5 of them.
Yeah. And the first one that is played by Amy Poehler's voice is joy.
Yeah. So Joy is kind of in control of her childhood, seems to kind of have the leadership role and makes a lot of decisions about what memories get kept in the forefront and what ones get put in the back because she's trying to dominate her life with Joy.
That's right. And kind of develop a good identity. And we see that starting, that Joy is managing the other four emotions and herself is developing from that.
Yeah. And then Sadness.
Oh, love Sadness.
Wah, wah. Sad little blue character
Yeah.
who always looks a little down.
Kind of like Eeyore.
Yeah.
Where she reminds me
Yeah.
of Eeyore a little bit.
Yeah.
Of like, oh, things are going to go bad.
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
But the funny thing is that Joy and Sadness seem to work well together. They seem to kind of be a team. Like
Yeah.
Joy will step back when Sadness needs to happen.
Yeah.
So they seem to have kind of a good partnership in helping Riley manage her life.
Yeah, I really like that kind of idea of feeling deeply about things. If you have joy and then things go wrong, that sadness seems to be the partner and shadow in that. And so, because if you don't have any joy, yeah, you might think that's going to protect you because then you don't care and then you wouldn't have sadness. So they're
Yeah.
buddies. They
Yeah.
go everywhere together.
Yeah, seem to be hand in hand. And then there's Fear.
Yes.
And Fear didn't seem to be super dominant, but that's one of the original characters. And then Anger.
And then Anger, yeah. I forget who plays that. I like that comedian, though, because he's always somewhat yelling.
Which fits.
Anger's always like, let's go after it. Let's attack. Let's fight.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of that part of the
Yeah, the
brain.
aggressive, like, let's go get him. Quick to respond. And then Disgust.
Yeah. And she's kind of comes across like a valley girl from the 80s.
Yeah, she's green and she's
Fashionable.
and she's easily grossed out by things. What do you think about that being like a major player in the emotions?
Yeah, I guess as little kids, it kind of is. They're grossed out by things or they're exploring gross things. So I get the disgust piece, but as a core emotion, I don't necessarily think of that as a therapist of one of the core
Yeah,
emotions.
for me, it wouldn't have popped up as if I was thinking of top 5 things that comes with everybody's sort of, out of the box sort of set of emotions. Disgust wouldn't be one I would think of, but she plays a role and she's there.
Yeah, and I think I like Fear. I think Fear is probably a strong one, and I like how Fear talked about, I'm here to protect you from the known threats, things
threats
we see. Because all of these feelings, I think sometimes we talk about them as good and bad, and they're in the movie. They're all really helpful, even though their help might be problematic. That fear is an important thing to keep us safe. Anger in terms of sense of justice, joy and sadness in terms of pain and kind of the beauty of connection. Yeah, and then we get into disgust, and I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure how it fits really, like how self-protective or how it's really a sense of self.
Yeah, I do know that with my siblings, I would use disgust as a tool of playing, of just trying to gross them out in various ways.
Well, it's a lot more sensitive in some than others, and I wouldn't say it's only in childhood. I know a lot of adults who are very easily disgusted by foods or bugs or...
Oh, let's talk about cicadas again. One more time.
No more cicadas.
Yes, that it can kind of be a visceral reaction that...
Yeah, and I guess that could be a protective thing. You're disgusted by moldy food in the fridge or something that you shouldn't be. That's not a fear-based thing, but it's a...
Yeah, survival.
It's a survival feeling, yeah.
We'll allow it.
We'll let that one slide.
No. So we have these 5 original emotions, and they're kicking it off, just kind of having a good time. Life seems to be pretty good.
And they've got their system going. Like they've got this rhythm where Joy kind of controls the panel. She's got her whole system of every time something happens, this memory falls down in this kind of crystal ball. Yeah. And she decides whether it's going in the main storage, where Riley will always remember it and it will turn into a core belief about herself, or if she pitches it way to the back of the brain so it doesn't get to have influence.
Yeah, I like those little sucky things. They're kind of like old-fashioned mail slots
tubes.
where
the tubes where the balls fall down. Yeah.
Yeah, so it goes and
Yep.
they send it to the back of the mind. And Joy thinks she's doing a good job by taking adverse memories and sending it back into deep storage, kind of suppressing.
Yes, I think they said that at some point. Oh, where the suppressed memories go. So yeah, that can, there can be some danger to that.
Yeah, and that becomes part of the story that we'll get to. But so can you kind of paint that picture, or I like painting that picture of where they have a memory and then Joy takes it down to this lake, which I don't know what it stands for, but she basically plants the memories in the lake.
Yeah.
In the lake.
So yeah, I forget the name, if there's a name for that, but that's where she plants the ones that she wants to become a memory that turns into a belief that becomes part of the sense of self.
These beliefs they picture as strings, and kind of she plucks it and you can hear the message that belief has. So your memories become a belief, and your belief then all at some point reach enough core beliefs to form a self. And that's what we see at the beginning, that she has this beautiful self formed by all of Joy's memories.
Yeah. So that's kind of the structure, I think, of this whole movie, is saying that, these feelings they become attached to memories, and then the memories become beliefs, and the beliefs, the ones that are strong enough are forming the structure of your identity, your sense of self. So using that structure, we're going to kind of go through what happens with those. And so we kind of led up to this big change that happens. She comes with her original emotions, and then everybody's living their life in her head just as usual. And then she goes to bed, after she turns 13, and the puberty, the adolescent alarm goes off. Yeah. And now, this construction crew comes in, and I don't think it's quite as abrupt as that. Maybe it's a more gradual process.
Do you want to know the hormone sequencing in pubertal timing and how it starts when we're asleep? Oh, yeah. Okay. But there's some hormones that happen, and they kick in. I love this because it's a really good developmental picture of what we know that happens. But when you fall asleep as a kid, you start to have that hormonal change and your body changes. And then you slide into actually physical change. And that's what I think they were getting at. But they did it in one night, which is ridiculous.
One night. Yeah. She wakes up and her whole attitude is different. So because this restructuring happened and these new emotions came in her life.
They kind of emerged.
That weren't there before.
Yeah. I loved it.
Yeah. So the first one to show up, which is this little orange character with crazy hair and comes in with a whole bunch of suitcases, the baggage that comes along. Yeah. Where can I put my stuff? And that is Anxiety.
Oh, yeah. Anxiety at the beginning was pretty cute, actually. I liked her or him. And Anxiety moves in and then slowly takes control, right? Kind of challenges Joy.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah, really challenging. The small character with kind of a frenetic personality.
Yeah, too much coffee.
Something like that. Yeah, and that's going to be a dominant thing that we'll talk about. But the other characters that arrived kind of in order after Anxiety are Envy.
Yep. And then and Envy was, you see that in adolescence a ton, like wanting to fit in, wanting to have what the other people have. What are we going to do to get there? Embarrassment, loved Embarrassment. This big purple.
Pink character.
Yeah, again, I'm not great with colors, so.
That I don't think ever talked, but just would blush a lot and hold his hoodie over his face.
Yep, only his nose stuck out, but was active. So Embarrassment was active and helpful.
Yeah, and so far those two are, have to do with that self interest or not self-awareness, but self-consciousness.
Yeah, kind of
that
the
comes with adolescence,
social cues
of like who do I fit in with? Do I have what they have?
Have I made a big social faux pas?
Am I saying the right thing?
Yeah,
is everybody looking at me?
And whenever Embarrassment would pull his hoodie on, then you'd cut to her face, to Riley's face, and she'd be blushing and kind of stuttering, and it was a really good kind of pairing.
Yeah.
And then we have a couple of other ones that you and I were not sure about. I can't even say this one.
So
It's French.
it's a French word, ennui.
Ennui.
Ennui shows up, and that's boredom. So this was this French character who was just sitting, lounging around and really not interested in what's going on, which I think any parent of a teenager recognizes that new sort of, well, I don't care, whatever. And it's sort of a disconnect of trying not to get too involved or take a risk.
Yeah, protection is by just kind of shutting down.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's truly boredom, but that's the characteristic that it looks like.
Disengaging kind of thing.
Yeah.
And her head's always tilted way over, like nonchalant.
Yeah, whatever.
Je ne sais quoi. And she's on her phone all the time, too, which is interesting that we see disconnection and kind of boredom connected to technology use. That she's using the phone to actually control the counter, the control center, which is interesting as well.
Oh, right. Yeah, she's using that. Well, she has sort of a remote access to the control center.
Yeah, that just shuts everything down. That it's just like, and we're done here.
Yeah, that's funny.
And we would see that, our kids like hobbiting, going into little holes in the house. Not actual holes or bedrooms, but
just needing to disconnect, shut off. Yeah.
And it was almost like things were too much, and it was a safe place. And so these emotions are helpful in the right quantities and right timing. And then my favorite, because I think it looked like me a little bit, was nostalgia.
The little old lady.
Yeah. Do you remember when?
This character, that sounded more like Kermit the Frog, David.
Oh, yeah, well, me and Kermit
back
go way
in my day.
Yeah,
so that was kind of a funny one to pop out, but I kind of understand it. The nostalgia, so this appeared as this old lady with knitting or having a cup of tea or something, popping out of a door and saying, oh, remember when? And it was something from not that long ago. But I think the idea of that is that as things change for adolescents and become kind of scary, there is a bit of nostalgia for, oh, life was easier when I was a kid. I remember even thinking that as when I was in that stage of life, and remembering our kids even saying that of like, wow, it was so much easier when all I had to do was go to the zoo when you told me to go to the zoo or whatever.
Yeah, school was coloring or recess time. And there's this kind of desire for less pressure and what we look back on as ease. But it was within our developmental challenge of the time.
Yeah. So she kept popping out and the other emotions kept saying, no, not yet, not yet, not time for you yet. So it was kind of an idea of what was to come.
Yeah. Later in life. But I do think that part of us is a strong part to help manage anxiety. That I like the picture of that little grandma grabbing the orange character and soothing her. It would be nice to see something like that. It didn't happen. So we have this happening, and as the brain gets restructured, there's lots of like bookcases or marble cases that's seen as the brain, that the old emotions are traveling, and the change of the leadership and brain structure leads to a big chasm in the brain, a big crevasse. It's actually called sarcasm.
I knew you loved this one.
I laughed out loud.
Because as we're traversing inside the brain, this sort of things fall apart and leave this big, I guess chasm is the best word for it, but like a big valley kind of that you can't get across. And it was about sarcasm. And so when the characters tried to communicate with somebody across the chasm, it's always misread as, rude or sarcastic, which it is.
Hey, we need help. Hey, we need help. And the echoes changed the meaning of it. And so the different parts of the brain were like, well, you're a jerk, and kind of moving away from that.
So it's the same words, but you're reading the emotion in it or the intention behind it differently, which is very much something that happens in adolescence.
Yeah. And I don't think the thing I liked about this is I don't think adolescents realize they're being sarcastic sometimes, that the intent is to communicate one way, but it comes across very, very different. Yeah. And we hear it as parents very, very, very differently than maybe the intent.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe.
I think that if I think about it that way as a parent, it frees me up to respond differently.
I think they're pretty good at sarcasm. Teenagers,
Yeah,
like
that's true.
they're pretty good at it. It becomes their language, but I think it's the misreading of what other people are saying that's hard. They're trying to understand the true intention, which I imagine is even a lot harder now that communication is over text and
Yeah.
you're not reading the body cues as much. And so you can think people are thinking differently about you than what is true.
Yeah, we had I got to help with a family therapy session last night, and we had an 18-year-old that couldn't look people in the eye in the family. And so the therapist was very creative and had people toss a ball around while they talked. The ball was nothing other than you have to look at where it's coming from. And it kind of increased the connection in a very powerful way. But it's that the natural tendency is away from that nonverbal reading that. And during development, that's what happens. We, as teenagers, we misread emotions and we feel them much more intensely.
Yeah.
There's a sensitivity to it that's different.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's happening now in the story? So we've kind of introduced the characters, and now our main character, Riley, is the whole setup is that she's trying out for this hockey team. And there's these new cool characters who are already on the hockey. It's a hockey camp to try out for the freshman team for high school. And there's these, characters she really looks up to and wants to be liked by, and finds out her friends, her lifelong close friends, will be going to a different high school. So she's feeling like she needs to form new relationships, but also feeling loyalty to her friends.
Yeah.
And the need to do her best in her sport and shine and stand out.
Yeah, and have a sense of belonging in the future. Like, these are the new people that I'm going to have to connect with. You know how I knew they were cool?
How's that?
They had red streaks in their hair.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
cool.
So cool.
Made them look adultish and hip, and that's Riley's kind of cue to them being cool.
Yeah. So she's got a lot of tension in her life. And so these new kind of emotions are coming up. And now we start to see anxiety want to take over because she's got things she's got to accomplish. And anxiety, I think when they introduce themselves, they say, my job is to protect her from the scary stuff she can't see. I plan for the future.
Yeah.
And so the other emotions are like, great.
Yeah.
Like, we need somebody to plan for the future.
Yeah, because joy's
doesn't
in the
really
moment.
do that. Yeah.
Joy's in the moment.
Right.
And
So the brain's like, great, let's plan for the future. And
It's
so
necessary.
anxiety flashes up all these possible scenarios on the screens of things that might happen if she doesn't do well at the hockey tryout, or if these people don't like her and think she's an idiot, or if her friends ditch her, or so all these what ifs start to just flood her brain.
Yeah. And I love that they have a little like call center with cubicles, and they have all these different parts of the brain working really hard to think about every possible contingent, and they're all negative.
And they're all terrible.
They're all threats. And it's creating more and more fear. Not fear, but it's more and more tension that's leading to the identity starting to change a bit.
Right. So anxiety starts working overtime to protect Riley from all these possible threats that are in the future. And so this tornado starts to kind of happen. Anxiety is working the control panel, and now everybody has stepped back. So anxiety is really overpowering things.
Yeah.
And it becomes this whirlwind of thoughts and feelings for Riley that turns into a panic attack.
Yeah, nothing else can penetrate that swirling.
Yeah, she can't access any of the other emotions because the anxiety has worked so hard to plant all these ideas of, what she needs to prepare for in the future. And they're all bad outcomes.
Yeah, and we see Riley, so that's what's happening in her head. And we see Riley, because of the negative messages, doing some behaviors on the ice that are atypical to how she used to play. And so she got a penalty because she just laid out her friend into the boards. And so she got a penalty. Coach put her in two-minute timeout. And this is where she has her panic attack. She's done something out of character.
Right. And she was so anxious to make all the goals because she had to get a certain number of goals to make the team that she doesn't pass the puck to anybody else. She dominates, and she's really different than her normal self.
Yeah.
And she gets the penalty. She's sitting in the box, and now she has a minute to think, and now that anxiety takes over completely, and you see the physical effects.
Yeah.
And I think for anybody who's witnessed a panic attack or had one, I think that scene felt very real for people.
Yeah.
Really well done.
Both inside and outside, what's
Mm-hmm.
happening in your brain and what's happening in your body. Her foot was bouncing. You could see she was having
Trouble
palpitations
breathing.
in her heart and kind of turning flush, sweating, and then the self-criticism of like almost banging her head in terms of just, oh, why? And this struggle
And being
physically.
frozen.
Yeah. So she has that going on, and her friends start to notice it. But internally, there's not a lot she can do. Anxiety is just out of control. And anxiety is like, oh no, anxiety's having anxiety about being anxiety.
Right, right. I think that's accurate too. Anxiety is anxious about the anxiety now, and there's just this whirlwind,
Yeah.
that nobody can penetrate.
It
And
feeds
so
on itself.
it does, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And so that's having this huge effect on Riley's body and in her brain, and it feels like it's not going to end. And so the thing that starts to happen, you see in her brain, is that is it Joy who gets in there and pulls anxiety out?
Yeah.
But in her body too, she starts to do some things that are good kind of counter actions for an anxiety attack. She starts to slow down her breathing. So you see her kind of take very deliberate breaths. And I know sometimes the breathing is hard to even access for people who are in that situation, but she physically puts her hand on the bench or on something. So she's grounding herself with some sensory things, which I think is really helpful for somebody who's stuck in that anxiety.
And what we see cognitively happening inside is Joy is able to talk a little bit to anxiety. Kind of there's this talk of let go, release. So in addition to breathing, grounding, there's a relaxation that's happening bodily, but that is a mental thing of just lean into it, let go, relax. But there's the parts in her having that conversation. And as soon as anxiety can let go, the rest of the physical pieces fall into place. And she starts, actually, I'm not sure it feels any better in the moment, but the pressure buildup kind of is a release, and there's tears.
So she has a release, and then her friends come over. They've noticed that she doesn't look well. They come over to talk to her, and she right away apologizes for what her behavior has been over the last few days, where she's been dismissing them and trying to be part of the cool crowd. So she releases that feeling that had pent up of her tension.
Yeah. And they respond well, which is great. It doesn't always happen that way, but they responded well. And there's a kind of coming together and a sense of safety that really is beautiful.
Yeah. So the relational connection was a really great resolution of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a really, really real scene. And I think really kind of the climax of the whole movie, of showing how when one of those emotions gets full control, especially anxiety, it can be debilitating. And it also began to create a different reality for her sense of self.
Yeah, so supplemental to that's the big climactic scene. But what we see also happening is Joy wants this kind of I'm lovable, I'm great, everything's great kind of self. And while the anxiety's happening, Joy is trying to replace that self with the self that's formed from the memories and the anxious talk and kind of shame. I think I would love to have seen shame be an emotion there, because I think from anxiety's effort to prevent future possible harm, there was a sense of I'm not good enough, and that becomes the self that's the orange anxious self, is I'm not good enough, I've never been good enough, all the negative aspects. So the other feelings are trying to tear that away while Joy is trying to calm down anxiety.
Yeah, so in the movie, there was a physical representation of her identity, of her sense of self. And it was kind of this glowing, beautiful, blue, flowery-looking orb as a child that Joy had carefully curated that the main message that added to that sense of self was, I'm a good person.
Yep.
So if you kind of hit those belief strings that were coming from the memories, it was all things that contributed to her thinking, I'm a good person.
Yeah.
I'm a good girl. I do good things. And then with all of these events that happen and anxiety taking over, anxiety was trying to get rid of that whole sense of self
Yep.
and create, and, I wouldn't say, I would just say, like, philosophically, anxiety isn't trying to create a worse sense of self. But the sense of self that was being created by these things was saying, I'm not good enough.
Right.
I'm
Try,
bad.
Try harder, work harder.
Yeah. So it was completely replacing all of that stuff from her childhood. And I think that is a huge tension for
Yeah.
us, for anybody developmentally, as they kind of grow into adulthood, of kind of realizing the world isn't as golden. And that's not for everybody. Some people know difficulty much earlier in life and that the world is a scary place.
Yeah, well, I think, maybe it's a pause to think about anxiety running rampant through society nowadays of it's trauma, right? Early trauma can send those messages. But I think you and I have been talking about this a lot of the number of choices. So thinking about anxiety, about all the potential threats. And then we put on top of that so many choices.
Yes.
Like it's remarkable here in North America, the number of choices, just like going out for breakfast, the number of choices
Yes.
you have to make can
Yes.
be really,
You have to
really.
answer 20 different questions.
I
And
just
you,
want an egg, please. Would you like that over easy, sunny side up?
scrambled. Would you
yeah.
like it farm fresh? Would you like it cage free? Would you like it whites only? Would you like,
Yeah. And then you
Yeah.
finally answer that. And would you like toast or pancakes with that?
and if you'd like toast, would you like whole wheat? Would you like sourdough? Would you like rye? Would you like an English muffin?
Yeah. And we also offer either ham, sausage, or bacon. Which would you like? How would you like that cooked? And by, after 15, 20 minutes of that, you're ready to pull well, if you have hair, I don't, but you're ready to pull your hair out
Yeah.
because having so much say puts you responsible for everything in your life. And so then thinking about anxiety being looking at all the threats, if you have all those choices, then you have all the potential of making all those choices wrong or only be held accountable to yourself for all those choices. It's overwhelming and our brains aren't fit for that.
Right. Yeah.
And so we have that scene here that kind of leads to, I think, what we're seeing culturally of, we are an anxious society. We have not too many choices, but there's so many possibilities that it's overwhelming and it's hard to pause
Yeah.
and get in our bodies.
Right. Yeah. And it's the overwhelming number of choices as well as the illusion that we are in control of
Yeah.
those choices and of the outcomes. And I think that leads to a lot of anxiety.
Yeah. And then that just tumult of
Yeah.
chaos. It's hard to get control or feel in control of our bodies, and our bodies are then doing these things to us. And so that's all going on. I think that this movie touches on, and I do like how you highlighted the self being formed from that. So it's a type of self, and it's a curated type of self, just like Joy was trying to curate a type of self. This is where I'm desperate to get into developmental literature. And maybe I'll just talk about it real quickly in terms of Erik Erikson talks about different ways that we form self. And there's diffuse, and that's kind of the early childhood where we don't think about it. And so the Inside Out first movie, there's no sense of self. It's just all the emotions at play and how are they integrated together. And then as we have memories and build beliefs and can think differently in the beliefs, then we start forming a sense of self. And there's a couple of ways of doing that. Erikson talks about foreclosure, which I think about in terms of joy and anxiety trying to do. So foreclosed self is where you just are, this is who I am, or this is how I'm going to be, or this is how I should be. And so anxiety can either foreclose kind of that, I'm not good enough, I have to try, the world's a scary place, or we can kind of push away all of our bad memories, experiences, and try to just have a joy foreclosed self of everything's fine. And that might work okay until bad things happen. And then it's a difficult integration.
Yeah.
So there's this foreclosure process. And then moratorium, which is normal adolescence, is what we tend to see at the end of trying different things on. And in different situations, different memories and messages coalesce to give a sense of self. But it's what is scary as a parent, because your kid comes home with a different hair color every week, or they have a tattoo, or they're, back when we were kids, it
Yeah.
was the goths, the preps, there was a different type of group that you could participate in.
Mm-hmm.
And we worry that it's going to be forever.
Right.
And it's just trying things on to
Yeah.
try to figure out where I fit, what fits best. And that's kind of moratorium. And then the last thing Erickson talks about is achieved, is where we kind of land in this movie. So this is the end of the developmental lecture.
Yeah, no, that's really relevant to what's going on here, because it really is about how the sense of self develops. And the conclusion in this movie after, and I think at first most people are kind of rooting for Joy. It seems natural to want to keep all the good things and get rid of the bad things, and that's what she's doing.
Yeah.
But then you realize it's just as wrong as what anxiety's doing.
Yeah.
Because it's not being honest about what's really happened in her life and integrating it into who she is in a healthy way.
Yeah, it hit really hard seeing that, because
Yeah.
I'm like, I know it in my head and developmentally, but watching it, you're like, oh, and it kind of flips the script a bit for us all.
It does, yeah. So in the end, they remove that jagged, uglier sense of self that was being developed by the anxious thoughts, all of the thoughts of I'm not good enough and I can't do this and I'm bad, and that also gets dismantled because they're
Yeah.
trying to put back the original blue glowing flower, but in the end it needed to be integrated where it's both and they mold together, and it still is something beautiful, but the anxiety is still going to be there. It just works together with what else is happening.
And I don't know if you noticed this, but it kind of went through all the colors of the feelings. So as the self kind of integrated and a different part or a different facet showed up, it was connected to a different color of the emotional characters, which I thought was a really neat thing.
So they're all present.
They're all present. They're all part of who we are. And I think that's important for us to think about our own life experiences. There's a lot of things I don't want to think about. A lot of parts of my life that either happened to me or bad life choices. And you don't want to think about it. And yet that's who all those experiences, everything we've gone to makes us up to who we are in this moment today.
Right.
And anxiety talked about identity as anxiety, and identity is not who I am, but who I should be. And that's the driving force. There's some kind of expectation, and shame's connected with that, right? Of like, I'm not enough. Shame is not meeting some external expectation.
Yeah.
And so anxiety is connecting our identity to performance, and this is who I should be to prevent all the possible harm, where identity is a combination of everything that's gone together, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah. It's cool, but I think that's something that we do carry. I think most people carry that into adulthood, of that sense of is my identity something that I should be or that I wish I was?
Yeah.
That people are still trying to kind of go there. And so it's a matter of how do you take the things that aren't so positive, that are experiences, memories, all of those things, and incorporate them into a positive sense of self, appreciating them, but not getting stuck there in the way that we did in that tornado of anxiety, because that's where it becomes debilitating when we get stuck with any one of them being completely dominant.
Yeah. And I think this is where the film let me down a little bit, is I think a lot of the protective factors are relationships. I mean, they implied it in terms of memories, but her friends, her parents, the sense of love, safety, security, that I can be this part of me and still be accepted. And for me, that comes from a church community, from my experience of God's love. It doesn't make everything okay, and I need to work on integrating, but there's a standard that's unconditional love that I experience in relationship that gives a greater likelihood of me integrating these pieces and being able to make sense of the painful pieces.
Right. Yeah, and for us that's an anchoring piece for our sense of self, is that my worth doesn't come from all the bad things I did,
Yeah.
or the good things I try to do. It's my worth comes from being created by God
Yep.
in the image of him. And so that doesn't make all of those emotions go away,
No.
but it adds to my core of who I think I am and
Hmm.
why I'm here, and that changes everything.
Yeah. I try to, I know you and I try to tell our kids, and I try to tell my students, you are loved and there's nothing you can do about it, right? There's nothing you can do to change it. You can test it and do difficult things. There's consequences, but it doesn't change your value, your worth, how we love you. But that's not a message everybody hears.
No, because I think that's where a lot of that anxiety comes from in general, and it did for Riley, of just that anxious feeling of am I loved? Am I enough? Am I doing enough? Can
Yeah.
I meet the standard? And we fight that even when we know our core value comes from something greater. So it's a constant life struggle,
Yeah.
I think. But I don't know how you overcome that if you don't have something bigger than
Yeah.
just yourself.
Right. And your experiences and making sense of it, because it's a painful existence. Bad things happen. And if we connect our worth just to that, to the good or the bad, it's pretty fleeting and jumping around.
Yeah, but it's
versus-
also a joyful experience. And, we believe that God gives us the beautiful things as just a hint
Yeah.
of the beauty of creation and of Him and of relationship and of what's to come.
Yeah.
So that's also hope. I wish hope was in there too.
Oh, that would have been a good one.
Yeah, joy and hope. There were a lot of ones that were negative, but hope, I don't know how you live without hope.
No. And I find it funny because you're focusing on hope and the positive, and I'm like, shame should have been there. What's wrong with me?
Sounds about right.
I was just like, but I think that's a battle. That's a piece of it. And almost like joy and sadness are together, I think hope and shame are kind of together.
Well, and I think we all have a default where we kind of tend to settle.
Yeah.
Just that might come with our personality, might come with our past experiences. And it's a constant battle to be reminded of how to integrate that with the rest of us and not just live there,
Yeah.
in embarrassment or shame or fear or, any of those.
Yeah. And having those, the power of relationship are the power of memories in this movie. So I'll let that be. But I was really sad that relationships weren't more.
Right. Well, and that's
direct.
something we know, and I think everybody knows, is that we have an influence on people's sense of self with our words.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you talk about those memories that become beliefs, that become sense of self, a lot of those memories have to do with how somebody treated us or what words were said to us. So we have influence
Yeah.
of the, on the people around us, our children, especially our families, our friends, strangers, of the way we look at people, the way we love them, the words we say to them. And that can become, you never know what will become a core memory, becomes part of somebody's belief.
And the final bit of the movie, the parents' internal voices and emotions are also there, which I loved and hated. But it's that we have these parts too going on inside of us, and so I guess I want to encourage parents of like, we fail regularly. And I don't want the anxiety of, you have to be the perfect parent. You have to do everything right. We bring the best we can to it, and we do good enough. And that there is much more resiliency in the complexity of ourselves being formed with good and bad experiences. The question and the challenge for myself and for you and for others is, are we willing to be intentional of trying, but not getting caught up in the shame cycle that we become performance oriented and we miss the bigger purpose.
Well, and also asking for forgiveness when we do mess up. Riley did that, and that's what partly resolved the situation.
Yeah.
She knew she had hurt her friends. She asked for forgiveness, and there was reconciliation and relationship.
Yeah. And for us as parents, it's okay to apologize to our kids. I think we focus on, we want respect and them to apologize, but they only are going to learn that by us modeling.
Right. They do
Right.
what we do, not what we say.
I know. I think just recently about pumping up bike tires, I had to apologize because of an emotional reaction that I had. So it's a good film, and it really leans into how are we doing? Are you attending to your emotions? Are you looking to integrate them? Because it's not getting rid of anxiety. I think the harder we
Yes.
tried to get rid of anxiety, the worse things
I think we
happen.
should paint that picture at the end of the movie. They get anxiety a comfortable chair and a cup of tea, and they say, well, you can live your anxiety. You're just going to hang out here for now.
Yep.
So finding the place for that. It's a movie we can recommend, and we'd recommend seeing it with your kids or friends and discussing it.
Yep.
I think it's a good open door to
But
talking
remember
about.
the basic needs of go to the movie, but then go out to dinner to have the conversation. The kids will talk more,
Yes.
especially if they're teenagers.
When you feed them.
Oh yeah, food is the conversation primer.
That's the ticket.
That is. All right, we'll have fun living inside out.